Dooley. I'd like to welcome you all here to the North Central Kansas Experiment Field Fall Field Day. I'd also like to welcome our viewers online who are with us. We hope we have a good program lined up for you tonight. I'll get things kicked off with a few introductions. This is Dr. Raj Khosla. He's our department head of agronomy. We're really glad that he can be here with us tonight. Going down the line, we've got Dr. Kraig Roozeboom. He'll be giving a talk later. Rebecca Zach, the River Valley crop production agent's with us. Sandra Wick, the post-rock crop production agent's here. Jay Wisbey with Central Kansas District is here. Our two field staff, Doug Stensis and Mike Larson, are with us. They'll be driving the truck and tractor to take us around the field. It's really thanks to their hard work that the field looks as good as it does. He couldn't be here tonight. He already went back to campus, but our summer worker, Lake Winter, also has been really helpful in keeping the field looking how it does. Again, really glad everyone showed up. I guess I'll also mention Dr. Lancaster is already in the field, and Dr. Morberg is here as well. I think that's all I've got. I think Raj has a few words to say.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the field day here. Scott Dooley is one of our agronomists for the Department of Agronomy that I head. I started my position in January of this year, so if some of you are not familiar with my name and face, you'll see more of me over time as we organize more events and more activities. Scott started in his agronomist position last year. It's been about a year now. And as I look around and I learn about his activities, what's going on here, I think he has hit the ground running. Things that are very relevant for the farmers and the issues that are relevant to you all is what this is all about. We perform research and extension that makes sense to you all so that you can continue to produce more, do it more efficiently, make more money hopefully, and be more sustainable. And so what you have today, you are in for a treat. We have our three specialist faculty members who are here. Dr. Kraig Roozeboom is right here sitting among you, and then we have Dr. Colby Moorberg and Sarah Lancaster. Sarah is going to talk about weed management and weed issues. Kraig, I understand he's going to talk about cropping systems, and Colby is going to talk about soil moisture, roots, and so forth. So I think we have a very good program. Just wanted to make sure you can put a name and face together. If you have ideas or suggestions, what we can do better, okay? The resources are limited, and there's no question about it. And pandemic took a big hit on everybody's pocketbook, including agronomy, including College of Ag, including K-State. And so if you have ideas how we could be more efficient with our resources in furthering things that are more meaningful for you, I would welcome your ideas, feedback, whatever you have. And with that, I'm around, happy to talk with you all as we look around and listen to our specialist. Back to you, Scott.
I think with that, we're ready to go on the field tour. Feel free to grab a bottle of water we've got in the coolers there. We'll load up on the trailer. We'll head north, listen to Dr. Lancaster's talk, and then we'll come back and listen at one spot to both Dr. Rosaboom and Dr. Morberg. So I'd say let's head off.
All right, good evening, everyone. Good to see so many faces here. My name is Colby Moorberg. I'm an associate professor of soil science in the Department of Agronomy. And for many of you, I'm probably a new face. I don't have a research appointment. I'm a teaching and research faculty member. But those of you that went to K-State, you might remember Stephen Teen from the Intro Soils class. So I'm his predecessor. So I teach our Intro Soils class, and I'm old enough that some of you have had my class and since graduated, so I'm starting to feel my age now. But for my research, one of the things that I focus on is roots. And roots, as you all know, are pretty important. It's the part that we don't see, and so what we don't see, we don't really keep in mind, right? We put a lot of attention on things that's above ground, but we don't put quite enough attention on things that are below ground. And part of that is just the limitations of methods that we have for actually studying those roots. And so one of my goals for my research program is to develop methods where we can more easily monitor and study those roots. So for field research methods, for actually going out in a real-world experiment and actually seeing how real-world soils are impacting roots, there's a lot of limitations for how we can monitor that. Some people have used cores to look at roots, but that has its own issues. A common method is what we call a mini Rhizotron. And I got up here today and I realized I forgot to actually bring a mini Rhizotron 2 with me. But imagine, if you will, a clear plastic tube. So just clear plastic about the size of a 3-inch PVC pipe, but it's transparent. And what we do with those tubes is we dig an auger hole into the soil, and we insert those mini Rhizotron tubes into the ground, and then we use what we call the mini Rhizotron camera that's inserted in that tube to actually take pictures of the roots. Prior to my work here at K-State, these cameras are really expensive. They're all manually operated, so there's a big labor cost there. But the cameras themselves retail for about $20,000 for a single camera. So there's a financial sort of hurdle to actually do the research on roots. And one of my goals was to make that a lot cheaper. So what my team has been developing is these little cameras here. So this is a fully automated mini Rhizotron camera. And I'll bring it over to that trailer in a second here, but you guys see that little coil there? So the same thing you guys use to wirelessly charge your phone, that's what the guts are inside your phone. And so we use that to charge a computer that's in here. There's another computer that's up top, and there's a little tiny camera that's the same type of camera you guys have on your cell phone right at the bottom. And so what we do is, I'll get this one by the truck here operating in a second, but we take these cameras and we put them in the tubes, and we run a little program on a computer that we send through Wi-Fi to these little cameras, and it lowers the camera down the tube, and it takes a picture every 5 millimeters in this case, so about every quarter inch. So we take a whole bunch of pictures, and by the end we end up with basically a collage of a whole bunch of root images that we can later go back and analyze. So I got this ready to go here. I'm gonna get this operating. All right, so it just started up. So it went to its home position, and now it's gonna move out, and it's gonna stop charging because it can only power the charger or the computer at one time. It can't do both. So it moves down. It's going to stop for a little bit, and the two computers, so by computers, this is the computer. So about the size of a stick of gum. These are called Raspberry Pis. They're about $30. You can order them on Amazon or anywhere else. This computer has about the same computing power that my desktop computer had that I built when I was in college. So about 2 gigabytes of RAM, HDMI, USB, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all for $30. So we have one of these that's up top, and it controls the motor, and another one down below that controls the camera. And in a few minutes, these LEDs are going to start turning on. And so inside that tube, it's completely dark. So those LEDs light it up, takes a picture of the root, turns the LED off, it moves 5 millimeters, and repeats this process until it does it 55 times down the length of this tube. So that's the process for imaging these roots. Now, I mentioned earlier that the commercial cameras are about 20 grand a piece. This one, including a couple 3D printed parts, all together it's about $300 total for just the parts. And then assuming about $20 an hour for a technician to put stuff together, it's about $200 to $300 labor to actually build the camera. So my hope is that this actually really changes how roots are researched and makes it a lot more cheap, a lot more affordable. And the goal is to openly license this. So all of you can go online, get the plans eventually, get the parts list, build your own, or just buy it as a kit or something. And then you can actually monitor your roots. now you might be thinking about the application for this. So this plot here, what our goal was to try to reduce how much irrigation water is being used at this site based on the rooting depth. So when we develop irrigation schedules, we assume that the water, or that the roots can get all the water in the soil down to about 1.5 meters deep, or 6 or 7 feet. But early on in the growing season, the corn roots aren't that deep. And so the goal was to actually determine where the rooting depth was of these corn plants, and then based on that, adjust our irrigation schedule so we don't have to irrigate as much early in the growing season. Now that, based on this site, where we actually had this precision irrigation system, this is about the only site we could actually do this experiment at one of K-State's fields. We had a couple of hiccups. One was the irrigation system was broke down for a week, right when we were kind of starting that little window where we could actually modify our schedule based on the roots. And then we also had some condensation in the tube where we couldn't actually see the roots the next week. So that 2 or 3 week window got kind of erased. But I think the idea is still possible. So we're going to keep on kind of trying this either here or at other places around Kansas. But that's just one application. So if you think of other examples, might be phenotyping for crop breeding. You might also look at maybe you're interested in water use at cover crops. You might actually see what depth those cover crop roots are actually getting to, and from there you can kind of determine how much water is going to be sucked up by those cover crops. So a lot of different applications, but basically we're just taking kind of a hacker's approach to making a really cheap little DIY little robot essentially to make root research a little more approachable and accessible. So any questions? Yeah. Post-processing, yeah. Yeah, so we get all these images, and they're great images. They're all 8 megapixel images. So there's actually a lot of data. And so one of the challenges for this is taking all those images and trying to sort of automatically convert an image into root data. So I had a grad student that was working on this. We first started out just looking at contrast, so looking at a light colored root versus the dark colored soil in the background. And just for a quick analysis, we were looking at the percentage of the pixels of an image that are roots versus pixels that are soil. So that at least gives us kind of a proxy for where the roots are in the profile, and gives us a quick way to analyze those images. Now, one advantage of this system is that it operates automatically. So we set this up where it takes pictures just like it is right now, once a day. And if you look at the commercial cameras, they're all manually operated. So if you're lucky, you might be able to get maybe weekly images if you have enough labor, or maybe once every 2 weeks. And so you have big gaps in between the images. But if we have daily images, we can see just little tiny advances by the roots every single time. And so our long-term goal is to develop some software that can basically use machine visioning and trace those roots as they grow downward through the profile. So just trying to speed up the whole process and get more robust data. So not just looking at pixels, but looking at the number of roots, the length of the roots, the architecture. At that point, we might be able to start doing some phenotyping, and you guys might look at different crop varieties or different seeds from your local salesman, and maybe they offer some drought tolerant varieties that are said to have a more robust root system. Well, with this sort of data, we should be able to sort of test that out and see what it looks like. So yeah, there's some more applications, but yeah, good question, Craig. Any other questions? Yeah.
So you're saying instead of going out in the soil, probably the ground, and just measuring soil moisture at the time of irrigation, you're just going to use this in the future, is what you're planning?
Not quite. So I actually have an instrument right here. This is called a Neutron Probe. So Craig, I know you're using this tomorrow. I took some measurements right before I started this talk here today. So this Neutron Probe is an instrument we use to measure soil moisture. we get a volumetric soil moisture content at different depths in the profile. So we're collecting soil moisture data and the root data, because when we think about irrigation, we want to go from whatever our current soil moisture is up to field capacity. And so we need to know what the soil moisture content is to sort of adjust for how much irrigation we need to apply. Because if we over apply, then we have leaching and we're losing irrigation. So ideally, if we're installing one of these in the ground, we'd also have some way to measure soil moisture too. Soil probing would also be a way to to kind of get a feel for just how dry the profile is. Yeah.
Dr. Morberg, with your the Rhizotron, you're trying to figure out maybe how deep the profile is that you're able to use, right? For the irrigation comment.
Yeah. So that was the application here, where our goal was to figure out how deep the roots are currently going, because those roots can only access the water that they've grown into at that point in the growing season. Yep. So we use that to figure out our depth of the profile, and then we'd also want to see how much water is in the profile to calculate how much irrigation water we need to apply to bring it back up to field capacity.
Then you're saying, I guess I'm trying to figure out what the farmer's purpose for this would be. Like, then you're saying you can shut your irrigation off sooner if you've got more capacity underneath, like your roots can reach water.
Let's say that. Let's use a hypothetical scenario here. So let's say that your normal irrigation rate early in the growing season is like 4 inches. And let's say for that 4 inches, you're assuming that you're going down for the top like 6 or 7 feet, right? But if we look at this root data from this camera, we see that the roots are only down to the top 3 feet. And so in that condition, we're only irrigating half the profile that we would have normally, so we can cut our irrigation rate from 4 inches to 2 inches. So we're just trying to kind of cut the depth that we're trying to irrigate off, because the bottom part of that profile is irrelevant for that early part of the growing season. Yep. Another challenge of this is the power supply. So we have a 12-volt battery in that yellow box in there. What you can't see in the field behind me is we have 6 solar panels, and those solar panels are connected to a box just like this with a battery and a router and all the other guts that can kind of control the power supply. That's something we'll have to think about for actually deploying these in farmers' fields down the road, because it is kind of a pain to manage a whole power supply like this. But yeah, we'll see as we get more applications and more ideas on the road. But at least for now, we got solar panels that are about as tall as the tassels are right now. They're in the middle. You can't see them? If you stand up, you might be able to actually see a couple of them. There's 6 in the field. You guys see any? Yeah, they're kind of right. They're not quite as tall as the tassels, but yeah. The trouble is we can't put them any higher, because then it starts running into the irrigation system. So don't want to make Scott's job any harder. Any other questions? All right.
So I guess I'm up next. Everybody got that all processed and ingested. My name's Kraig Roozeboom. I'm in cropping systems research and teaching at K-State. And Raj gave you a very specific topic that I was going to cover. I was going to cover cropping systems, right? Well, actually, that's a pretty broad subject, right? What we're really looking at are field peas and how they might fit in our Kansas crop rotations, specifically no-till crop rotations. And I'm standing on this side of the trailer so that I have the sun in my eyes and you guys don't, okay? The study is actually right behind you if you want to look at it. I apologize for the foxtail, etc. We thought we had a plan for getting things sprayed and something fell through the cracks, but I sprayed it today. Hopefully we'll make some headway on it. But you see the empty strips out there, right? That's where we had the peas. And we harvested those in July. And before I get into any more detail, I'll just mention this is a project funded by the, I can't say the name of it, but it's a Pulse Industry Group. And they have a project, and it's in cooperation with the USDA. It's managed out of the lab up in North Dakota. And they're looking at ways to expand the footprint of pulses, all pulses, and peas are just one of the pulses they're interested in. And further west, they've had some success with spring peas in far northwest Kansas. So, raise your hand if you're from west of here. One person is west of this location. Two? How far west? Cocker City. Yeah. Yeah. So a little ways. What is that? 30 miles? A little further. And you were how far? Okay. So I apologize, the gentleman from Downs. I know I've met you before. I can't remember your name. Ray, yep. So anyway, you get the prize for furthest west. Are there any peas in your country? Yeah, people are messing around with them a little bit. You got to go a little further west, and before you find any significant acreage, and even then it's not like it's taken over the countryside, but some people are making them work. Couple of reasons why it works is market, right? You got to have a market. There's a market in Hastings, Nebraska now. There's a fair market in eastern Kansas at the pet food industry. And so there are a couple of options for folks to go with them. Why would people out in western Kansas be interested in peas in the first place? You don't care. You don't live in western Kansas, right? Must not need water. Well, sorry. A rotation. They have very few broadleaf options in the rotations. They got wheat, they got corn, they got sorghum, and then they go back to wheat and maybe a fallow, and they're just looking for broadleaf options, and legumes even a benefit or added bonus. Soybeans tend not to do that well as we move west, especially if you don't have irrigation. So, why would we even be thinking about peas this far east, do you think? Or east? What would be a potential benefit? Let me set this up a little more. I'll give you a little more information. You see there some beans behind you with some empty strips where we had peas. Then there's wheat stubble, and behind that's corn. That's our rotation. And so it actually, did I say that right? We'll harvest that corn and we'll plant peas this fall or the spring. We got both falls and winters. After the beans come off, we'll plant wheat, and then that next year we'll go back to corn. So in that rotation, now that you know that, why would we be thinking about peas as an alternative to soybeans? You're going to have to speak up.
Okay. Are these fall seeded?
We got both fall seeded and spring seeded peas. Yeah, we don't need to worry about volunteer too much.
The freeze will take care of them.
Oh, yeah, the winter peas survive the winter. Yeah. How many of you are very happy with no-till wheat going behind your full season soybeans? Or does anybody grow wheat anymore? Mr. Dooley does. Yeah. Do you do no-till wheat after soybeans? Yeah. But as we move a little further west, I got to admit, we're probably too far east for this system, but we have the site, and part of our goal is how far east can we pull these things and have a difference, right? Thing is, when you're planting wheat after soybeans, it pushes that planting date later into the fall. And so you got to put more seed out, you probably got to put more nitrogen on it. And sometimes you take a little bit of a hit at, say, if you were following wheat or even following corn sometimes, where you can get in earlier. And so the thinking is, if we can maintain the legume in the system, but it comes off in July, it's almost like planting that wheat after fallow. Has anybody planted wheat after fallow maybe years ago? It can do pretty well. And so that's part of the thinking. We're looking at it here for that reason. We have the repetition of this at Manhattan. We also have 2 versions of this experiment at Hayes and at Colby. And instead of comparing it to soybeans, we're comparing it to fallow. So they've got, I always got to think about this. Wheat planted after fallow goes to corn. Then they got a fallow year, goes back to wheat. And instead of fallow, they're inserting peas after the corn ahead of the wheat. And so there, it's not so much to make the wheat do better. In fact, they know there's a chance those peas are going to ding their wheat a little bit, but they're maybe getting something out of that fallow period, right? And so that's the goal. And so we've had this out here for a couple of years. As you know, it takes a little time to get the rotation going. And we've got 2 years of wheat harvest after our pea soybeans or peas fallow out west. And you might be wondering, well, how did the peas do? Anybody wondering how the peas do? Okay. Not so well here. Somewhere around 1/3 to 1/2 of the soybean yield. So that's a big hit on that legume chunk of your rotation, right? You get out to Colby, that first year they harvested 80 bushel winter peas. That's pretty nice legume yields in that country. All non-irrigated, by the way. That's why those beans partly why those beans don't look so good. Nothing's irrigated in this. We're also looking at springs versus winters. Springs, they've had a track record of success. We're looking at some winter peas as well. And it's kind of like spring versus winter wheat. We don't grow spring wheat because it gets too hot at the end of grain fill, right? Winter wheat gets going early, finishes hopefully before the nastiest heat comes. Well, we're thinking, can winter peas give us a similar advantage over spring peas? The reason we haven't looked at winter peas historically is, one, they didn't have the yellow food grade winter pea varieties out there. They were all springs. And they feel like they've made a little improvement in winter hardiness, which is one of the limitations in the peas. And so we've been looking at that. And honestly, location to location, it varies. Out west, the winters have been pretty competitive some years, other years not so much. Out here and at Manhattan, the springs that usually outdo the winters. One of the things is we're planting into that corn stubble and a relatively dry seed bed, and they come up, but we just don't get the stands we'd like. They survive the winter for the most part, but we don't get the stands we like. So that's a problem. But we're really kind of interested in what happens to the wheat after we harvest them. And so we've done a couple of years of that now. And in 2020, all 4 locations, no difference. The wheat yielded the same. Whether you had peas ahead of it, fallow ahead of it, soybeans ahead of it. You know, the yield varied with location, but it didn't matter what was growing ahead of the wheat. But early in the season, you could visually look at that wheat after peas and say, that looks better. It's ahead, it's thicker. We actually took data looking at canopy information. The numbers said, yeah, it looks better early on. Anybody remember what happened in April of 2020? You had a pretty late freeze, and so that kind of evened all that wheat out. So actually that earlier wheat was dinged a little worse than the wheat after the soybeans, and it washed all that out. This year we didn't have the freeze. And so the wheat here after peas yielded 5 bushel better than after the soybeans. Not much of a difference. The wheat at Manhattan after peas, let me back up. The wheat at Manhattan after soybeans yielded 50 bushel to the acre. The wheat after peas at Manhattan was 75 bushel to the acre. So a 25 bushel differential. Now we're talking kind of interesting. That's one time. Probably doesn't make up for the half yield of peas versus soybeans, right? But it shows, it's kind of a proof of concept that there's potential there. I think really we're looking at, as we move west from here, there's the potential to maybe have a legume in the rotation where bean and pea yields start to equilibrate, become more equal. Peas may bring the added advantage of maybe giving that subsequent wheat crop a better chance. You can get it in earlier and take advantage of fall tillers, all of those things. Out west, this year, no difference in wheat yields again, which is actually good news because the peas really didn't ding. We had okay pea yields out there. Having peas instead of fallow didn't really ding the wheat so bad. They've looked at that in other experiments as well, and sometimes it will. So they kind of factor that in, and you probably have to judge what the season is like before you go plant them, what your moisture prospects are. But I think as we move west, Jewell, Smith, Phillips County, and as soybean yields start to drop off, pea yields start to come up, there's a point there where there may be a fit for this. I'll mention, got 2 grad students working on the project. Neither of them could be here tonight, unfortunately. But they'll be looking at not just the yields, but the economics, some soil health stuff. And so we'll get a good handle on the impact of the different crop rotations on the whole profitability and impact on the whole cropping system. So, questions? Yes.
Have you tried to determine how much nitrogen is getting stored in the ground?
So, gentleman asked about nitrogen storage, or peas are a legume, right? And they do fix nitrogen. That's one of the components of this study. We don't have the results yet, but we are pulling samples and sending them in for analysis where you can differentiate between isotopes of nitrogen to determine if it came from the air or from the soil. And those samples are in process even now. Other information that we've had would indicate that they're probably going to be similar to soybeans, but it's relative to yield. If you got half as many peas, you got probably half as much nitrogen fixed. But we're looking at that, but there is the potential for some of that residual nitrogen benefit. Any other questions? Yeah.
So, how do peas know when to, is there early season, late season? How do they know when to go ahead and finish their production cycle? Corn is heat units, soybeans is day length or night length.
Right.
How does that work?
So the gentleman asked how do peas, what drives development of peas mainly and finishing it. So peas are a little bit unique in that the different varieties will start flowering at different heights up the plant. They have a node, plants have nodes. Actually, peas don't have leaves. The peas we grow, they're semi-leafless. What looks like leaves are the stipules and then they have tendrils where the leaf would be. But the other thing about peas is they're pretty waxy, so they conserve moisture. But so that maturity thing is, how quick does it start moving up the plant? Which node does it start flowering at? That's a genetic control. You know, kind of, there's some environmental influence of that, but genetics will tell it, okay, I got X number of nodes, start producing flowers. And it'll keep doing it. It'll just keep adding them as long as conditions are right, and it sets pods. And once it gets a sufficient pod fill, it says, that's all I can handle. I'm going to fill these pods, and it kind of tails off and quits. So it's very indeterminate. It'll flower, 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 get enough pods, and then it stops. That's part of why it works well out west. You got elevation, cool nights, and maybe cooler temperatures, and so it can keep that up. Part of what we run into is kind of like with spring wheat and stuff. Okay, flower, flower, flower. Even though you don't have a big pod set, it's getting hot. It shuts it down, and so then you only have fewer nodes producing peas. And so that's part of the reason why I think they don't work well further east. Plus, diseases tend to hit it. They like the drier conditions, downy mildew and stuff. But yeah, further west, those cooler nights, cooler conditions, they can keep that going. And further north, up in the Dakotas, that's why they fit well up there.
Have you found any varietal differences in
So Sandra asked about variety differences. And so we have 5 varieties of each the spring and the winters. And yes, some locations, some years, some are better than others. But we've not been able to say, by golly, that's the variety we want. Because then next year, maybe it's not so great. So yeah, the spring peas, Lucas Haig up northwest does variety trials, and he's got a lot of good data. And we actually use that data to pick the variety. So we're hopefully looking at the cream of the crop. But even within that, yeah, some do better than others, but we haven't kind of nailed it down yet.
Have the winter peas over? Have they survived the winter, or are there differences in varieties?
How well do the winter peas survive the winter, and are there variety differences in that? And yes, there are variety differences. Generally, they survive okay. I think we're getting them in a little late. I'd like to get them planted earlier. We're planting in middle to late October, and I'd like to get them in early October or sooner. But that's when our seed has been coming, and we just haven't been able to get a hold of that seed any sooner. But the thing is, even with planting late, those things will emerge all winter long and early spring and take off. And so even though they may not be up in November, they'll be up in February and March.
For Facebook, are we good? All right. My name is Sarah Lancaster. I am the Extension Weed Scientist here at K-State, and this is my first field day here at Scandia. So I'm excited to be here and real pleased to have had the opportunity to work with Scott as he has helped my students, Chad Lammers, with this soybean project here that we are standing in. Raj, you could truly tell people that you're weed specialist, so it's spelled like elite, but with an A at the beginning, elite. And it is a pre-emergence option. So most of our herbicide-resistant traits on the market are for post-emergence herbicides, right? Liberty, glyphosate, 2,4-D, dicamba. But elite is a pre-emergence herbicide, okay? So that was one of the varieties. The other variety that we're looking at is Enlist. So, different parts of the state of Kansas, some folks prefer the Extend system, some folks prefer the Enlist system. We went with the Enlist system. There's a fair amount of work looking at weed management in dicamba-resistant soybeans, and it just seemed like there was a little bit more of a gap in terms of data for folks using the Enlist system. So we're trying to address some questions for folks in that system as well. One of which, Dr. Rosaboom, check it out. My soybeans have dicamba injury too. Yeah. So, all right. So that was one factor, was herbicide trait. The second factor that we looked at is row spacing. Okay. We talk about from a sort of theoretical perspective, the fact that the quicker you can get crop canopy, the better your weed control is going to be, right? And narrowing up that soybean row increases or shortens the time that you have to have and increases the rate at which you build crop canopy, okay? The problem is we don't have a ton. For example, if I want to give a presentation this winter and show you just how effective that is, I don't have those data for Kansas, okay? So we're going to try to get some of those data to demonstrate how row spacing, so comparing 30 and 15-inch rows, to evaluate how those row spacings interact with layered residual herbicides. Okay, as we think about herbicide-resistant weed management, one of the recommendations that we make is to use layered residual herbicides. Okay, so basically what that means is we're going to come back with a Group 15 herbicide, so something like a Dooley or maybe a Warrant later in the season. Okay, so the theory is that we'll be able to keep an effective concentration of that residual herbicide in the soil throughout the growing season. Okay, because we don't want, especially water hemp and Palmer amaranth, coming through later in the season and producing a bunch of seeds that we're going to have to control next year. Okay, so those were the three factors. So the herbicide variety, the row spacing, and then the use of that layered residual herbicide. Okay, so we're conducting this trial. We conducted it in Ottawa last year. This year we've got it here, Ottawa, and Manhattan. So we're trying to hit the key soybean production regions in the state to try to develop a good data set for you guys. So we have some preliminary data that I have shared on the handout. Okay, so the top part of the handout is just that list of treatments, and you can see when we planted and when we sprayed, and then when the first activating rainfall would have occurred. Okay, so in the case of our pre, it was about 10 days after planting and application of that pre-emergence herbicide, and in the case of the post, it was just about 3 days later. Okay, so as you guys, many of y'all are aware, I'm sure, that activating rainfall is super important for good activity of our pre's. Not too much, not too little. We got to kind of be Goldilocks on that rainfall. Scott, don't let me talk too long. Okay? All right, so our preliminary data. What you've got there on the graph at the bottom of the front page of the title page, you're looking at dry weed biomass. So the way weed scientists collect data, we do a couple of things. We often come out and just give an ocular estimation, a visual rating. We look at those plots and we say, that looks like 90% control, that looks like 70% control, and we record that, okay? The other thing we can do that is a little less subjective, and my students love it when they have to do this, is come out and clip the biomass that's present in the field, okay? So that's what we did here. At the time of that post-emergence herbicide application, Chad came out and he clipped the weeds that were present. Now, Scott Dooley has done a magnificent job of managing weeds on this farm. We had less than anticipated water hemp pressure back here, and your biggest problem, right? So we're okay with that. So what I say that to direct you to the bars on that bar chart. So that is the amount of weed biomass that was present at the time of post-application in the low management system, so pre only, the medium management system, so the pre with the post application of a Liberty-based post application for both systems, or the high management system, which included that overlapping residual, so that application of dual, Dr. Hay, in the post-emergence application. So very low levels of weed pressure here at Scandia. That's the darker bars on that bar chart. In Ottawa, we had a little bit greater weed pressure, but still our pre's did a pretty good job for us in these particular conditions. Okay, if you look all the way over at the right, you can see the non-treated weed pressure, and that gives you an idea of the differences between the weed pressure here and in Ottawa. Much greater weed pressure in Ottawa. All right, the backside, we're going to look at some of those visual estimates of weed control. Again, we've got the low, medium, and high system, so pre only, pre plus post with the residual. And, you know, really, as long as we included a post application, we were getting really excellent control of both the grasses, so yellow foxtail and crabgrass here at Scandia, and then also water hemp control down in Ottawa. Okay, so I think just from a preliminary standpoint, that's one of the takeaways, is that as long as we're including that post-emergence application, don't shoot me, Marshall, we're not going to have major differences in weed control. Okay? We're going to collect yield data and do a partial economic analysis and look at that as well. But here's the caveat. Okay? Here's what we're not collecting from this study that in hindsight maybe we should have. The difference between 97% control of water hemp and 99% control of water hemp from a visual estimation is probably only like 3 million seeds, right? So even though we have very excellent weed control in these plots, even without the residual herbicide, if we can, A, use that residual herbicide to bump up that weed control, and B, extend the period of that excellent weed control, we'll probably be money ahead when we look at a 5-year weed management budget, especially in situations where we have known or suspected herbicide resistance. Okay? So,
hi, I'm Rebecca Zach. I'm the crop production agent in River Valley, and this is the final of our summer plot tour. We ended at Fall Field Days here at Scandia headquarters. Had a pretty good turnout. Hope you go back and watch the video in case you missed it. Here we also have...
I'm Jay Wisbey. I'm the Central Kansas District crop production agent.
And I'm Sandra Wick. I'm the Post Rock District crop production agent. So, and like Rebecca said, these will be posted on all 3 of our websites. As far as our winter programming coming up, it may look a little bit different than you're used to. We may be doing hybrid, which just simply means we might have an online option for you, or possibly in person as well. So we're going to kind of investigate different methods of delivery. So we'll see what works best for you.